What's up guys, Intellitech Studios here, and today we're going to be doing a review on Dyson's pretty well forgotten flagship vacuum cleaner. This is the UP14 model, also known as the Dyson Cinetic Big Ball. Now, this comes in a bunch of different variants, with the main differences between all of them being the color of the Cyclone pack, which mine is silver, and the name that follows the amount of attachments that you get with it. Mine is the Animal Plus Allergy variant, which comes with a ton of accessories, but we're mainly going to be focusing on the machine itself. Now, this machine, contrary to popular belief, is still available for sale. It's currently out of stock right now, but you can buy this exact model direct from Dyson. And you can also find it on the used, secondhand, and refurbished market for anywhere from $250 all the way upwards of $500 for one brand new in the box. So the Dyson, you see right there, $550 brand new in box. So you can find this vacuum for a wide range of prices, and of course how much you get it for will determine whether or not it's worth it for you. But the biggest thing that you should know right now is that assuming this machine goes back in stock, which it probably will, as it has in the past, this will be Dyson's most expensive machine and also their heaviest. And potentially this would be a machine, assuming again it goes back on sale, would be one that actually addresses some of the flaws that I've complained about with Dyson uprights, but then also introduces some of its own to offset that. So I'll explain what I mean by all of that later on in this review. But for now, let's take an overall look at the Dyson Cinetic Big Ball and do an in-depth review on this machine after I've used it as my daily vacuum for a little over a year at this point, on and off.
Hi, Boot. Are you enjoying the grocery bags? Quick little intermission. My cat, Boot, appears to be Preggo. Is that your response? So, she might have babies soon. We'll see how many. Or if that even is. I mean, I'm hesitant, but she's showing signs of being pregnant, so might have kitties.
And on that note, this vacuum is pretty good with pet hair. So, good news is that if I am using this machine after that happens, then it will do a fine job at picking up pet hair. And overall, this newer Dyson cleaner head design, this is one of the first machines with the updated cleaner head. Not the most recent updated cleaner head with the Ball Animal 3, but the one that Dyson's had for a few years. So this does clean very, very well on both carpets and bare floors. Now, as far as the different types of carpeting, there have been some people that have had issues with running this machine on certain types of carpet. So I wouldn't recommend this Dyson if you have a lot of sealed or rubber-backed rugs, because the way that this machine clamps down onto carpet and the way that it has a lot of suction and airflow will often cause it to stick down to those types of rugs and be very difficult to move. But if you have any other type of carpet, then Personally, I haven't had any problems with using this machine on any type of carpeting that I have, which includes this medium pile carpet, my very short pile carpet upstairs, and the very, very thick 70s style carpet, plush carpeting, that's at my dad's house. So a lot of people have said this machine doesn't work on thick carpet. On all the thick carpet that I've tried it on, it works just fine. So your mileage may vary, but it is something to mention. So definitely try it on all of your surfaces if you do get this machine, and make sure that it works well for what you have. There is no suction adjustment on this machine, unfortunately, whereas if you get the newest Ball Animal 3, you actually do have a suction slider on the front of this cleaner head. And confusingly enough, the UK version of the Cinetic Big Ball does have a suction adjuster as well, but this US version does not. So you cannot adjust the suction on this unit. However, I have noticed that the suction is a lot more usable on this machine than it is on the non-kinetic variants of the Dyson uprights. So for example, if I compare this to my Dyson Ball Total Clean that I just reviewed, one thing I have noticed when comparing these two is that this one's suction is a lot more strong. And I don't mean that in a positive way for this. This Dyson Cinetic actually has a suction relief valve right on the cyclone assembly, which makes it work a lot better for upholstery and above floor cleaning, because the suction actually has a chance to reduce itself a little bit when you're using the hose and when you're on carpets, which means that while the actual weight of this is 2 pounds heavier than the standard Ball Animal 2, it makes up for it in terms of the usable suction. So that is an advantage there. Hi, Boot. And that is one of the reasons why I actually like using the Cinetic for tools and for floors. Mostly for tools is where it affects my usage, because of the fact that the suction relief valve does kick in when you cap off the suction even a little bit. So it kind of helps regulate things a little bit better than these units do, which is odd because this is technically the older vacuum. But if you've had problems in the past with Dysons sucking too much, as weird as that sounds, as far as like whenever you're trying to do your drapes or when you're trying to do your upholstery, if you find that the hose just clamps down on whatever it is you're trying to vacuum, then the Cinetic might actually be a worthy look. That's something that pretty much nobody who's reviewed the Cinetic has actually mentioned, that the suction relief valve on this is a lot more sensitive, and in the case of this machine, it's actually a good thing. So it's a lot easier to use the hose on the Cinetic than one of the newer Ball Dysons, because of the fact that that suction relief valve kicks in sooner, so the suction is a lot more controlled, and it's still perfectly enough to suck up anything that you need to off your couches or anything like that, and it is still good to spin it up. It's still good enough to spin up any turbo brush, so that makes it very good as well. That's one of the first things I noticed when I switched from using my Total Clean to the Cinetic, is that the suction is a lot more usable. So that right there is a really good feature for the Cinetic. Now, beyond that one discrepancy, the tool situation is exactly the same as it is with any modern Dyson. You flip up the wand cap, you grab the red wand, and you pull it straight out. You can pull the hose until this clicks into place, and you can see once it clicks in, the wand is up, and that's all there is to it. There's no handle or anything to slide out. The handle stays on the machine, and you can simply grab the wand by holding the end of this hose. Okay, I tried to grab that and I didn't. So you do hold it right here, which some people have complained about that, how there isn't an actual handle. But I personally like this because I find that vacuums that make you hold a handle while using the tools, usually the handle is way too big and it makes using the tools very awkward. That's the case with this Shark right here as an example, the Rotator MV752. I find that using the tools on this is very unpleasant, whereas on the Dyson, it's perfectly fine. You can take any of the two onboard attachments and fit it right onto the end of the wand or onto the end of the hose, and both of those will release with their respective buttons. So for example, if I have this right here and I want to grab the crevice tool and dusting brush, this can attach right onto the end of the wand, just like this, and it clicks into place. And I can push this brush tool up if I want to use the brush, and I can pull it down, which is it's not wanting to go for some reason. And I can pull this down if I want to use the crevice tool. Now, I do notice that sometimes these tools do fail. Sometimes this brush will break off, but having the crevice tool and the dusting brush in one attachment, it does work very well, and both the crevice tool does a great job at getting into corners and crevices, and the dusting brush is very nice and soft, and it does a good job at doing any sort of dusting. And depending on what variant of the Cinetic you get, you could have extra attachments as well, which would give you even more opportunities for dusting and all that stuff. So all that is excellent. And if you want to attach tools directly to the end of the hose, you press this red button, pop the wand off, and this is your upholstery tool. This is what you would use for couches and stairs and whatnot, depending on what type of upholstery you have. It also can work for mattresses, but they do make specialized tools for all of these applications as well. And if you get the Animal Plus Allergy model like I have, you will have a bunch of extra attachments, and the attachments do fit on board. Now, only these two attachments fit on board, so if you do have a version like this silver model that comes with a bunch of extra attachments, only these two will fit on board, but they do fit on board just fine. Sometimes I notice the upholstery tool will sometimes not want to attach properly, so if you put this in and put this on, if it'll focus, you have to really push it in to get it to clip into place. But the good news is that then that means that when you push this button, it actually pops out and you can pull it off with just one hand. Now, the only time you'd really need to do that is if you were doing something else at the same time, or if you, in my case, happen to be filming. So The tool situation on this Cinetic is very good. The hose stretches all the way up a flight of stairs. Now, in my case, this hose is an aftermarket replacement, so it doesn't quite stretch as far. But if you have a proper hose on it, it will stretch almost to the top of your stairs. In my case, my staircase is about 13 steps. Well, not about, it is 13 steps, which means that since this hose can go up to about 12, that pretty much means that I have to put the machine at the top of the stairs to get the last step. But that's not really a big deal. It would be nice if it made it toward that last step, so that way I could leave the machine at the bottom for all of the steps. But it stretches good enough to make it up most flights of stairs, and especially if you have a landing in between your two sets of stairs, then you'd have zero problems getting up the stairs with this machine. So that's one thing I've always loved about Dysons, going all the way back to the original Dyson DC07 in the States. They all have been able to stretch enough to get up a standard flight of stairs, and in every single case, they always get all but the last step, which, you know, sure, you could argue that it should be a little bit longer, but I still find that to be a lot easier of a solution, especially on this Cinetic, than something like a Shark where you'd have to use the lift away function. That can be a little bit more awkward, and especially since this Cinetic has the more sensitive pressure release, I find that the hose doesn't pull on itself nearly as much as it does on the other Dysons. Now, the other Dysons are perfectly fine at vacuuming stairs, but the further up the set of stairs you get, the more you'll feel the suction pulling on the hose, which can make the hose feel a lot heavier than it actually is, and it can be a little bit straining, especially if you have back or shoulder issues. It's not the end of the world. It definitely is relatively minimal, but that is something that is even better on the Cinetic. So you do get some sort of trade-off for the increased weight. So while the increased weight to 19 pounds versus 17 pounds on this unit does make it a little bit more cumbersome when you're vacuuming floors, because of the more sensitive pressure release valve, it makes it a little bit easier when you're using the hose and using the attachments. So there is a trade-off there. It's just a matter of picking which one you prefer and which one you would rather, well, for lack of a better word, struggle with. So the tools on this are excellent, and since we're looking next to the cord, this has a 35-foot cord, which in my opinion is the sweet spot for vacuum cords, because 30 feet in my opinion is the bare minimum nowadays, and 40 feet gets to the point when you're going to be taking a little bit of extra time to wind it up, so you could argue that it's starting to become an inconvenience at that point. 35 feet is what the Cinetic has, and depending on what version of the UP13 you have, which this is, you know, one model number away, some versions of the UP13 only have 30 feet, some have 35. This one has 35 across the board, to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure every version of the Cinetic has a 35-foot cord. Even the 30-foot cord is okay, but the 35 feet on this model is excellent, and having a 35-foot cord is fantastic. You wind the cord around the lower cord winder right here and the upper cord winder right here. When you're done, you do have a clip on the cord, and when you want to start vacuuming, you can pull this down and pull the entirety of the cord off. You do have to remove the cord entirely in order to get access to the wand and the tools, which some people have complained about, but for me, it doesn't really bother me at all. So I find that to be perfectly simple, because usually if I'm vacuuming the entire house, in fact 99 times out of 100, I'm going to remove the entire cord anyways, so it never bothered me. But one thing that I did mention to Dyson as a potential feature, now that these new Dyson uprights don't have any sort of, you know, handle that comes off with the wand, since you always leave the handle behind whether or not you're using the tools, I kind of wish that Dyson would have incorporated a cord clip right here on the handle, since this handle is removable. You can press this black button and replace the handle. So it is simple to do, but it's not necessary when you're actually using the machine. You'd only do that if you really broke the handle. So, you know, it's not like, oh, it'd be too permanent if it broke, if the clip broke. So why Dyson doesn't add a cord clip right here is beyond me, because it'd be really nice if Dyson could add a clip just right here where the cord could clip into, and that way, because the handle is always on the machine, even if you pull off the wand, you still could have that cord clip in place to keep the cord out of the way. Now, the cord comes out at the middle of the machine towards the top. It doesn't come out at the bottom like a lot of cheap machines, so I rarely have any issues with the cord getting in the way anyways. But it would be nice if Dyson added a cord clip right here just to make that extra little bit, so that way the cord's even further up and it's even less likely to get in the way while you're vacuuming. I don't know why Dyson doesn't do that. It'd be very simple to do, and heck, they wouldn't even have to redesign the machine. They could just redesign this handle and add a little clip right here. And then at that point, if anyone wanted to just buy the new handle and put it on their old machines, they could do that. So I kind of wish Dyson would do that, because that would address one of the complaints that a lot of people have had with Dyson vacuums, which is keeping the cord out of the way. So I personally don't have many problems with the cord as is, but it still would be nice to have that extra feature. As far as using the Dyson Cinetic Big Ball, I already showed you how to use the wand and the tools, but as far as using it for carpet mode and floor mode, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll still show you anyways, since it can be a little confusing when you get your first Dyson. So the way that you recline the machine is actually pretty simple. You just grab this handle and pull it back. Now, if you pull it back while applying the slightest bit of pressure downwards, that causes these back wheels to pop up and out of the way. And now you have access to the ball. Now, the ball is the steering mechanism that all the new Dyson uprights have. You see that you can twist the body of the machine and steer around in different ways. Now, because this ball is bigger than the other ball, hence the name Big Ball, that does make it a little bit more awkward and cumbersome to move, especially around corners. And because both the ball and the Cyclone add a good amount of weight, that makes it to where the entire spine of the vacuum does flex more as a result. Because this spine of the vacuum is very thin and flexible, and because of the fact that we no longer have a metal wand, this whole thing does flex a real good amount. Now, the good news is it's better for your plastic to flex. That way it can actually absorb those flexes and not actually snap in half. Now, that is a good design choice on Dyson's part, but the disadvantage is that it makes the machine feel very flimsy, and in some cases it can still break. I have seen some people with DC41s, which is the older version of this design, with cracked spines, where basically right along this main area the vacuum would break in half. Now, I have a hard time believing that that will happen under normal use, but the simple fact that this does flex a lot does make it feel cheaper than it really is. So it would be nice if Dyson could reinforce this spine a little bit. I'm not saying they have to get rid of the flexible plastic, because that is a good safeguard, but having some sort of reinforcement along this back spine, I think would make a world of difference in the feeling of the build quality of this machine, especially when you're trying to use the ball. You can see when you're trying to twist this, all of this flexes. You can even see where the bin attaches. This flexes a good amount, and that causes the gasket right here to lose contact, which is not good. So there's just a little bits of issues with this design that I wish Dyson would address, but with the Ball Animal 3 it does not appear like they have addressed that, so it seems like that's still going to be a problem with Dyson uprights. But as long as they're careful with the machine, it shouldn't be a problem. You know, for what it's worth, my mother still has her old DC77 from 2006, and that thing is still running. She still uses it every day, and it still has not broken yet. It's still running just fine. So there is something to be said about Dyson's durability. It's just not going to be as much as a more commercial-oriented machine, so you still want to be careful with it, and you don't want to be rough with it. But that is something to notice. If you get this out of the box and you feel like this is wiggly, that's just how it is. Especially when you're trying to twist the machine and use the ball. So I find myself not really using the ball on this too much. I generally just push it and pull it normally, and I only rarely turn it around corners, but it is nice to have that just in case. Now, pushing and pulling it is pretty self-explanatory, but when you want to put it upright, you just simply push it forward until the back wheels click down. Now, I've noticed on the Cinetic, they tend to slam down with a lot more force than the other Dyson balls. And alternatively, if you don't want to pull the machine back, you can step on the front and pull it back, just like many other vacuums, but I generally recommend against that because it puts a lot of strain on this power head. But putting it upright is fairly self-explanatory, but it can be loud, and you want to make sure it clicks in all the way, because one issue with these earlier Dyson balls is that some people have complained that they put the wheels down and they feel like it clicks, but it doesn't actually go down, and they have to push it forward until there's that extra click. Now, Dyson did address that issue on the Cinetic. It's a lot more obvious when you put it upright because the wheels slam down and snap into place. So it takes more force to put it in the upright position, but for many people it feels like it is a little bit more confidence inspiring in terms of it being sure to be locked into place. I worded that a little bit funny, but you know what I mean. Now, as far as actually using the machine, there are two buttons right up here. This is the power button, and this is the brush roller on-off button. So whenever you recline the machine, you press this button to shut off the brush bar. Now, this actually resets every time you put the vacuum in the whenever you turn the vacuum off. So if you're vacuuming bare floors with the brush roller off, like this, and you put it upright, you see sometimes it doesn't like to go down, and then you put it back, then it will remain with the brush off. So it will remember what setting you had it on as long as you don't turn off the machine. If you turn off the vacuum and then turn it back on, it will go back into carpet mode by default. So you want to make sure that you check that and make sure the brush is off on bare floors so you don't damage them. Now, one thing to mention about all Dysons is that the brush roller will always be off when the machine is upright. So if you're using the attachments on this, unlike a lot of cheaper machines, you don't have to worry about the brush roller damaging your carpet because it's not going to be spinning in the first place. I've had this happen when I've sold vacuums to people and they thought that the brush roller was malfunctioning because of the fact that they had issues where they turned it on and the brush wasn't spinning, but they didn't realize that you have to actually recline the machine in order to make the brush spin, which to me seems obvious because you're obviously not using the brush roll if the machine's standing up anyways. So that is something to note. Now, this brush roller does have an automatic reset, so there is no reset button on this brush roller. So if for whatever reason the brush roller is not spinning when it's turned on, then you want to check and make sure it's connected properly. There's a little connector right up here and a little red clip that holds it on. So you want to make sure it's on correctly. If it's not, or if it is on correctly and the brush still isn't spinning, then it's probably an issue either with the brush roll motor itself or with the connectors inside the vacuum. So there isn't a proper way to reset the brush roll. You just kind of have to mess with it and hope that it works. But in my experience, these brush rolls are pretty reliable, except for one little flaw that we'll talk about in a sec. Now, there's two things I need to speak about in regards to this brush roll design, and there's a reason why I have two in front of me. Now, this particular Dyson Cinetic is from 2015. This is one of the first Dyson Cinetics that were ever produced. So the previous owners of this machine bought it when it was brand new technology. So this is one of the oldest Cinetics that you will see. So again, that also could potentially speak words about its durability since it is 7 years old and it is still running. But one thing that is having some issues is this brush roller. Now, the reason being is that one issue with this design of brush roller, and this is something that Dyson just addressed on the new Ball Animal 3, but the Cinetic uses the old style brush and the heads are not interchangeable. This brush roller design does an excellent job at cleaning carpets. It agitates very well, and it does a great job at grooming and leaving carpet lines. This is one of the best performing Dysons you can get nowadays. But there's one flaw with this design, and that's the fact that whenever you open this up, which is very easy, you can just simply turn these red tabs just like this, and the entire base plate pops off. You can see that each side of the brush is held in by 2 screws. So there's 4 screws in total holding both ends of the brush roll on. Now, these screws are very small, and they are very cheap screws. These screws are not very good quality, and that almost feels like it was done on purpose. But these are not very good quality, and they strip very easily. So what happened with this machine is that one screw on each side of this brush roll assembly stripped out, which means that I can't remove these brush rollers, because once you pull off these screws, they simply pull out of each side. So I can't disassemble these brush rollers. And what happens with a lot of these, if you're not careful, is if you don't clean the hair off of these like regularly like you should, hair can actually get stuck in this drive right here. And that can actually strip out this drive for each of these brushes. And if that happens, then it's, it's toasted at that point. Like, there isn't much you can do. Now the good news is that mine does still work, but it makes a very audible buzzing noise whenever it is running. It sounds like it is struggling. And the good news is that I contacted Dyson. Even though this is a well-documented design flaw, Dyson understood that, and they, under warranty, sent me a brand new cleaner head. Now you can see the difference here. The old one has this felt strip on it, whereas all the ones that you buy today, I assume, are going to have this standard cleaner head, which is identical to the newer Ball Animal 2, in that the only difference is that it doesn't have this felt strip. So, and that does make a difference in terms of hard floor performance, so I'll get to that in a sec. So, you want to make sure to keep these brush rollers clean from any hair, because this is not a hair self-tangling brush roll. If one of the features that you prioritize is a brush roll that doesn't get tangled with hair as easily, then don't even consider this machine. Just spend the money on the Ball Animal 3 instead, as that has a proper anti-tangle brush roller. But this is the older design that does not. So you want to make sure to keep hair and strings off of this. You can see I've used this one a few times, and there's very little hair that's gotten on it. So as long as you don't have obscenely long hair in your family, it shouldn't be an issue. But if it is, you can very easily pop off this base plate and simply grab all the hairs off, or you can run a pair of scissors or a blade along these grooves right here and cut off the hair. As long as you do that, I recommend doing that every time you empty the bin. Then you won't have the issue of hair getting in here, and you shouldn't have any issues with the drive stripping out. So as long as you take care of it, you shouldn't have a problem there, but it is something you're going to want to keep an eye on. So since you don't have that, monthly filter washing maintenance, you do still have to keep track of the brush roll. But as long as you do that, you keep track of the brush roll on this, and you make sure you don't overfill the bin, then you shouldn't have any problems with this machine running.
One other thing to note about these Dysons is that there is no manual height adjustment. Now, what Dyson has is this technology called the active base plate, where there's basically this accordion style design that allows the head to free float above the carpet and above the floor surface. So the idea is that when you transition onto a hard floor, this seals down, so that way you can suck up any debris in cracks and crevices, and it does a great job at that. And then when you're on carpets, this will push itself up depending on how thick your pile is, and accordingly let out as many brushes as is necessary to groom your specific carpet. So this potentially could cause an issue on certain types of carpeting, like I mentioned, but in my experience, this has been great because I haven't had to worry about adjusting any sort of adjustment, and it just works every time. So your mileage may vary with that. Again, I've seen some reviews where people said that this went too low and stuck to their carpets and made it hard to push, or in some cases shut off the brush roll entirely. But again, in my experience, I have not had that problem. This system has been very reliable, at least on the multiple types of carpet that I have tried. Now, before we get into the pickup test and the conclusions of this machine, I need to talk about the quirks and features of it. And by quirks, by features and quirks, I mean just the quirks. Now, this machine does have one advantage that the lighter weight machine does not have, and that's in terms of one specific aspect of longevity, and that's this lower hose right here. Now, this may seem like a relatively frivolous thing to talk about, but if you notice, this hose has a little tab right here that you can easily remove, and a little clip right here that you can easily pull out. So you can actually just pull this hose right out, you press this clip, and this entire hose pops out. Now, what that means is that if this hose splits, especially if you're in a dry climate, this hose is incredibly easy to change. You can buy this hose for 10, maybe 15 bucks and change this yourself in a span of about 2 minutes, which is great because just like with the main back hose, this lower hose is very easy to change. So if it breaks or splits, you can very easily, you can see right here, I can just put this right back in where it was, pop this tab in, and it's good to go. Your new hose is installed. Whereas on this unit, on the Ball Animal 2 and the Dyson Ball Animal and the other Ball units, this is held on by a screw and there is no tab underneath. So if this hose breaks on one of these Dysons,
unless you want to spend, a good 2 hours of completely tearing apart your machine and messing with a ton of different things, all of which many things could go wrong, then this is going to cause you a lot of heartache, unless you want to send it into Dyson and pay the money to have it fixed out of warranty, because, well, it's not going to be covered under warranty to my knowledge. So, and even if it is, you got to be without your vacuum for 2 weeks. So that's not a very good feature, and Dyson, it seems, on their newest units have still not addressed this flaw, despite the fact that they addressed it on the old Cinetic. So if you live in a dry climate and you've had a lot of vacuums that you've had to retire due to the hoses actually breaking, this may be a reason to go with the Cinetic, because if this hose breaks, it's very easy to change and you won't have to stress out about one more thing breaking on your vacuum that you can't fix. One other thing I'm going to complain about is something that Dyson should be ashamed of, and that is false advertising. What do you see right here? This is a filter, and there's one on each side of the ball, and it requires several screws to take out in order to change these filters. These filters, unlike the very similar looking HEPA filter on these other Dysons, not only do they require tools to open instead of a simple click lock, they are not washable, and they have to be replaced. In fact, they have to be replaced about every year, maybe every 2 years, depending on usage. If you stretch it, you can maybe get away with changing these every 3 or 4 years. But still, that's an expense you have to spend every few years. And these filters are not covered under warranty. Now, that would normally make sense were it not for the fact that if you actually look at Dyson's website, it says on their website, Dyson Kinetic Big Ball, the only vacuum with no filters to wash or replace. No filters to wash or replace. And there isn't even an asterisk on the website saying, oh, it's within the lifetime of the vacuum. They don't even do that. They just straight up tell you there are no filters to wash or replace. That's fraud. That's a scam. There's no other way to put that. That is a blatant lie that Dyson has put on their website to convince people to buy this, only to then bait and switch them, 4 or 5 years down the line with filters that they in fact have to replace, and that not only are not covered under warranty, but are more expensive than the filters in the cheaper machine. So you're spending more on a machine under the premise that you are paying for the luxury of not having to change any filters. Except not only do you still have to change the filters, you can't wash them, and they're way more expensive and harder to replace than these other filters. Because there is one filter on each side of the ball. You still have 2 filters in this machine, only instead of one filter being here and one filter being up here, you have both filters on the ball. There is no filter in the bin because of the kinetic science, which it does work well, I'll give it that. This kinetic science actually does work and do a great job at keeping dust out of the motor, because this intake right here is completely dust free, it's completely clean. So at least on my unit, this technology actually does work. So if all Dyson did was just make both of these filters twist off, just like this machine does, you can see where it twists off. If they did that and made them washable just like these filters, then I wouldn't really have a problem with it. But the fact that these are held in by screws for no reason, and the fact that the website lies and tells you that you don't have to replace these filters when in fact you do, I can't condone that. Because when it comes time to replace both of these filters, because you have to replace both of them, how much is it per filter? It's $50 per filter, direct from Dyson. And unlike these filters, I have not been able to find any aftermarket replacements. So the genuine Dyson filters, you're going to have to drop $90 to $100 on a filter change every 3 to 4 years. Or if you really want to stretch it and hurt your vacuum a little bit in the process, that's every 5 years. On a vacuum that you were sold on under the guise that there would be no filter maintenance. That's just not good. There's just nothing I can do to condone that, because that is just blatantly dishonest advertising, Dyson. And they're still doing it with this machine. So do not be fooled into thinking that you're buying this machine and you're spending the extra money to not have to change filters, because you do. This filter on each side of the ball, each one is held in with several screws, about 4 or 5 screws. And again, these screws, much like the ones on the brush, are very prone to breaking and very prone to stripping out, which means if you strip out these screws when trying to change this filter, the good news is the new filters do come with screws, but if you strip out these screws when trying to change this filter, oh no, looks like you have to send it into Dyson so that way they can extract the broken screw, unless you happen to have a way yourself to extract these small broken screws without damaging your $700 vacuum. That's not good. That is not acceptable, and Dyson should be ashamed of themselves for that dishonest marketing. I'm honestly surprised there hasn't been a class action lawsuit yet, because that is serious. You're selling someone on the premise of something that isn't actually there, and that's the feature of not having to change or wash filters. So that's unfortunate. All right. Now, as per usual, with the pickup test, it did a decent job at getting most of the flakes out of the carpet. And wow, so it got everything off of the floor except where the transition is. So the active base plate didn't quite seal as good as it could have, unfortunately. This is fairly typical results. So performance on carpets and bare floors is very good. So my conclusion of this machine is mixed. I actually do still really enjoy this machine despite those downfalls that I just mentioned. And I am actually considering using this machine over my other Dyson, specifically because of the advantage when it comes to tool usage and that lower hose issue that I mentioned. So even though I kind of bashed on this a little bit because of that Dyson policy, I still do really like this machine, and I honestly can recommend it for somebody if they know what they're getting into. But for most people, it just seems like buying the less expensive Ball Animal 2, or even now the Ball Animal 3, just seems to make more sense for the majority of people. And if only Dyson could add the improvements that they made to this machine to those machines, then there wouldn't be a reason to buy this. So that is that. I do still really like it, but it's hard to recommend because of that filter issue, and there doesn't seem to be many benefits from it. But the Cinetic technology is still very impressive, and I would love to see Dyson make an updated version of this, but it doesn't seem like they're going to. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Cinetic technology going into the future, but in the meantime, as is, this is a mixed recommendation. So for most people, I would say get the Ball Animal 3 or even the Ball Animal 2 instead. But again, I can still appreciate it and still appreciate Dyson's innovation, but as per usual, Dyson's execution leaves a little bit to be desired. But again, I may keep using this machine. So anyways, this is Intellitech Studios signing out. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a good one. Peace.